Words from the Exodus by Isaac Asimov, Part 2. Chapter 2, Moses. The second book of the Bible begins with the phrase, "Now these are the names," or in Hebrew, Ve'ele Shemoth. Ve'ele Shemoth. Now the Jews customarily name the early books of the Bible after the first words. For that reason, the Hebrew name for the second book is Ve'ele Shemoth, or simply Shemoth, names. When the Bible was first translated into Greek by the Jews of Alexandria, it's translated from the Aramaic, the Hebrew, into the Greek, by the Jews of Alexandria, Egypt, in 250 BC, this second book was naturally, here's a footnote indication below, as the author explained, Isaac Asimov, in words in Genesis, the Jews after the time of Alexander the Great spread over a wide area of the Mediterranean world. There was a particularly large and prosperous colony in Alexandria, which was then the capital of Egypt. These Alexandrian Jews began to use Greek as the language and slowly forgot the ancestral Hebrew, probably the original ancient very old Hebrew. So today we've got this modified, possibly by the Masoretic text, the Masoret, sorry, or perhaps it actually being Canaanite Ugaritic. Okay, so there was a particularly large and prosperous colony in Alexandria, which was then the capital of Egypt. These Alexandrian Jews began to use Greek as their language and slowly forgot the ancestral Hebrew. In order that they might not lose touch with the Bible, they arranged to have it translated into Greek. When the Bible was first translated into Greek by the Jews of Alexandria, Egypt, in 250 BC, this second book was naturally given a Greek word as its title. Since it deals mainly with the events leading to the departure of the descendants of Jacob from Egypt, this book was named Exodus, meaning a going out or liberation, in the Aramaic, the original ancient, very old Aramaic, Tav Asher. This became Exodus, Exodus in Latin. The biblical use of this word has made it part of the English language. With a capital letter, the word refers particularly to the events of this book, the book of Exodus. With a small letter, it can refer to any departure of a number of people, like you have Bob Marley in his song Exodus, movement of the people, leaving Babylon, returning to the father's land, Africa. So it's a coming out of, right? Or a leaving, a liberation from. In quoting from the book, the author used the abbreviation X and would follow it with the number of the chapter and verse. Thus, X23 will mean Exodus chapter 2, verse 3. Exodus begins with a quick summary of the final events in the book of Genesis. In this way, the two books are tied together. It's a continuing saga, isn't it? Exodus 1:1. Now these are the names of the children of Israel which came into Egypt. Jacob bore the alternate name of Israel. God changed his name to Israel because he would be the father of men or something like that. And the phrase children of Israel refers in this case to Israel or Jacob's actual children. Later in the book and in the Bible generally, however, children of Israel refers to all of Jacob's descendants, to any number of generations. It does not, of course, refer only to children. If we were to say the children of America, we would mean the young boys and girls. The phrase the children of Israel includes, however, all Israelites of any age. The names of Jacob's sons are listed, and then the passage of time is indicated, as in Exodus 1:6-7. Then came a crisis in the affairs of the Israelites, leading to the enslavement, that there rose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph, the actual king before it, Pharaoh, or whoever he was before. Joseph, according to the story in Genesis, had ruled Egypt. Okay, so here's Pharaoh. Wisely and to the benefit of the Egyptians. Consequently, his family was well treated, if only for the sake of his memory. But now a king came to power who could disregard the memory of Joseph. This seems to mean that a new dynasty came to power. Perhaps it was the 18th dynasty, and the king referred to was Amesis. Then one could suppose that the new king was a native Egyptian who hated the Hyksos and the Asians that had come in with them. with the Asiatics. It would become a matter of patriotism to know not Joseph. The traditional date system of Ussher puts the events of the Book of Exodus between the years 1531 BC and 1491 BC, or just before the reign of the great Moses III, according to the chronology in Langer, probably Langer's book. This is well after the 18th dynasty rose to power. Perhaps then the new king was the first important king of the 19th dynasty. That would be Seti I, who began his rule in 1313 BC. But he was followed by Ramses II, who reigned long and victoriously, and that doesn't fit the Book of Exodus. Traditionally, the king referred to in Exodus 1:8 is Ramses II himself. He was followed by the weak king Muneptah, whose reign there were the destructive raids, and whose reign there were the destruction raids of the people of the sea. That seems to make more sense. In any case, the new king, let us say Ramses II, feared that the Israelites, being of Asian descent or Asiatic descent, might side with another invading host from Asia or Asia Minor. This was particularly important since the Israelites lived in Goshen, which was adjacent to Egypt's Asian frontier or Asiatic frontier. The decision was made, therefore, to put them to hard service and wear them out, as in Exodus 1:11. Okay, so what we found is the chronological table is too far forward. Okay, from some other archaeologists that actually did the research and came up with the idea or proof that these archaeologists, Christians, tried to fit their findings with the Bible, right? So they ended up putting it 100 or so years ahead, too far ahead. We found that it was actually further back. It was someone like Moses I, right? That was the king. Pharaoh is a traditional name for all the Egyptian kings during the biblical period, as he explained in words in Genesis. It actually means the house of, or the place of. It doesn't actually mean kings. But in the English, in the Greek, into the English, it's used as title for a king. As for Python, and Ramses, they were located east of the Nile Delta, fronting the isthmus of land across which Asian nomads might invade after the fashion of the Hyksos. They were on the borders of Goshen, where the Israelites lived. The cities were apparently not treasure cities in the sense that Pharaoh filled them with gold and silver. However, the ruins of Patum in Egyptian, meaning house of Tum being of their gods, showed subterranean chambers which were probably used to store grain. This, in case of a siege, would have been a treasure indeed. The Revised Standard Version Bible therefore refers to the cities more logically as store cities, footnote indication, and below it says there have been some readers of the Bible who felt that the enslaved Israelites were set to building the pyramids. However, the pyramids were built 1,000 years before the traditional time of the Book of Exodus. As a matter of fact, the pyramids are never mentioned in the Bible. The name of the second city makes it seem logical that it was founded by a pharaoh named Ramses and named after himself. Ramses II was the most powerful of the Ramessids and filled Egypt with monuments praising himself. He is quite likely to have named a city for himself. He actually did, and then it was attacked and destroyed by the Assyrians, apparently, who ruled for a time. For these reasons, Ramses II is quite commonly called the Pharaoh of the oppression. So that city was called the city of Ramses. For these reasons, Ramses II is quite commonly called the Pharaoh of the oppression. Moreover, because of the first verses of Exodus, Egyptian bondage has come to mean any kind of hard service, cruelly enforced. Despite the enforced labour, however, the Israelites continued to multiply, and Pharaoh decided to take more direct action. He ordered that all male babies born to the Israelites be destroyed. Consequently, when a woman of the tribe of Levi, the third of Jacob's sons, gave birth to a little boy, she hid him to save him from death, and when she could do so no longer, she took desperate measures. Exodus 2:3. Bulrushes are sturdy reeds that grow at the edge of a river. As a matter of fact, the bulrushes were papyrus reeds of which writing material was made and which gave it its name finally to paper. See Words in Genesis, the book Words in Genesis by Issac Asimov. The word ark recalls Noah's ark, about which the author spoke of in Words in Genesis. In both cases, the ark is a chest protecting its content from harm. Noah's Ark was a large chest housing many men and animals. This ark was a tiny one to protect an infant, i.e. the baby Moses. The river is the Nile. The name is from the Greek Nilos, but nobody knows where the Greeks got the name. As it happens, the infant was found by Pharaoh's daughter, who took pity on the crying baby, though she knew it must be an Israelite child. The baby's older sister, standing nearby, offered to fetch a nurse, and of course fetched her own mother. The sister will appear again in the story, Miriam. When the child grew beyond the nursing stage, the mother turned him over to Pharaoh's daughter, and no doubt to feel that in the care of the princess, the youngster would be spared slavery and death. As for Pharaoh's daughter, Exodus 2:10, Moses became his son, which she called his name Moses, and as she said, because I drew him out of the water. The Israelites were fond of using names that had meaning, as did most people, until the names became so common that the original meaning is forgotten. In the Bible, it was also traditional to name a child after some event in connection with his birth. The Hebrew version of the name given by Pharaoh's daughter is Moshe, and the Hebrew word Marsha means to draw out. The connection to Hebrew-speaking people would seem obvious. There's the Sargon II story, which is very, very similar. That came thousands of years before. What do you think? A myth that became a myth. The myth surrounding Moses. However, it seems unlikely that an Egyptian princess would name her adopted son by means of a Hebrew word, the language of slaves. She would be much more likely to give him an Egyptian name, and Moses does seem to be such a name. It means son in Egyptian. It appears in the names of some of the best known pharaohs. Thus, Thutmose is son of Thoth, an Egyptian god, while Ramesses is son of Ra, another Egyptian god. Egyptian name or not, however, Moses turned out to be the most revered hero of the Israelite tradition, so revered in fact that there was a certain hesitation in using the name afterward. There are fewer Moseses in later Jewish history than there are Jacobs and Abraham's and Joseph's. The name is not altogether absent, however. Moses ben Maimon, better known as Maimonides, was a renowned Jewish philosopher of the 12th century who was born in Muslim Spain, or Mohammedan Spain, and lived out his life in Muslim Egypt, or Mohammedan Egypt. Again, Moses Mendelssohn was a Jewish philosopher of the 18th century who lived in Germany. His grandson was Felix Mendelssohn, the composer. Maybe the Australian actor Ben Mendelssohn is related to him, who knows. Returning to the original Moses, it was the traditional belief of the Jews, a belief which Christians accepted, that Moses was the author of the first 5 books of the Bible. Footnote indication below. Modern Bible scholars believe that the 5 books were not written by one person, but are a combination of several different lines of tradition. They can pick out the different lines by the names used for God, by the type of material involved, and so on. This higher criticism need not concern us in this book, however. Supposedly, what we came across, the Jewish tradition was you had to name a book. Okay, so they named it and attributed it to Moses. They admit that. Okay, Moses never actually wrote it. He was never actually the author, but it's traditional for us to give a book a name, right? Any book a name, especially the scriptural ones. Okay, we'll go back to that. Returning to the original Moses, it was a traditional belief of the Jews, a belief which Christians accepted, that Moses was the author of the first 5 books of the Bible. For that reason, these 5 books are sometimes lumped together as the Book of Moses. The edition of the authorized version, which the author Isaac Asimov was using at the time, calls Genesis the first book of Moses. Called Genesis. Follows that with the second book of Moses called Exodus, and so on. A more formal name for the 5 books of Moses is Pentateuch, from Greek words meaning 5 books. Moses grew up with an Egyptian education and upbringing, but either he knew himself to be an Israelite, or he realized it later, or else he simply sympathized with the people in bondage, and then realised he was one of them. In any case, he was angered one day at the sight of an Egyptian overseer striking an Israelite. He interfered in the matter and killed the Egyptian. It turned out that this had been witnessed, and Moses felt that it would not be safe to remain in Egypt. For that reason, he travelled eastward into the land of Midian, but he was found out. So they tried to get him, put him to trial, probably kill him, but he ran off. He fled for his life, which is usually thought of as being located on the northwestern edge of the Arabian Peninsula. There, the power of Pharaoh did not extend. In Midian, Moses met and married Zipporah, meaning bird in Hebrew, the daughter of Ruel, meaning God is his friend. So in the ancient original Aramaic, it was probably Ruel, because this El was wrongly scribed as an Elohim from the Canaanite Ugaritic language, where the original name of God in the Aramaic, the original ancient, very old Aramaic, was El, E-I-L. Okay, so Ruel means God is his friend. A Midianite priest. There is some confusion about the name of Moses' father-in-law, for a few years later he is called Jethro. Perhaps he was known by both names, as Jacob was also known as Israel, or perhaps one of the names was a title. Moses had a son named Gershom, and might have settled down for the rest of his life as a shepherd and herdsman, but events were marching on in Egypt. There the Pharaoh of the oppression, Ramses II, and he questions that, had died, and a new Pharaoh had come to the throne, Meneptah, and he questions that again, often called the Pharaoh of the Exodus because it was under him that the Israelites left Egypt. If Meneptah is the Pharaoh of the Exodus, then the Exodus must have taken place about 1215 BC, or almost 300 years after the traditional date of 1491 BC set by Usher. The description of the turning point in Moses' life begins with Exodus 3:1. The mountain here referred to as Horeb is considered to be the same as the mountain spoken of in other places in Exodus as Sinai. It is called the Mount of God because through much of biblical history this mountain was associated with God. Well, actually, we did a video on Exodus of the Tower of Asher, the original Aramaic, from the old language Lishana Artica Saprat, sacred scribal language, and it said, tell the Israelites that under bondage in Egypt, they will come and work for me at this mountain, Mountain Kuriv, in the Sinai. Okay, that's in the Aramaic. So this Horeb must be in the Hebrew. It's called the Mountain of God because through much of biblical history, this mountain was associated with God. In particular, it was at Mount Sinai that the Israelites were to receive the most important revelation of the Old Testament. Exactly where Mount Sinai or Horeb is located has been a matter of dispute. Since Moses was living in Midian at the time, it might seem natural to have the mountain in Midian too. However, the verse says that Moses led the flock to the backside of the desert. The Revised Standard Version Bible has Moses led the flock to the west side of the wilderness. While Midian borders on the Gulf of Aqaba, which is the northeasternmost inlet of the Red Sea. The Gulf is to the west of Midian, and the other side of the narrow stretch of water might be considered the backside, not as in bottom, but the back side, or the west side of the wilderness. On this west side is a triangular peninsula lying between Egypt and Arabia, and he suggests to see the map on page 197 within this book. Near the southern tip of the peninsula is a mountain range. A particular peak of this mountain range, one which is about 1.5 miles high, is usually identified as Mount Sinai.